Hello and welcome to the Demi Taste podcast. I am your host, Demi Tastes, your host with a mouth for talking and for tasting. And I'm joined by my co-host Phil. And I'm sorry if I seem sleepy today because I am. I just got back from the American Craft Spirits Conference in Denver, which was also coincided with the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission's annual meeting and the largest public gathering of American single malt whiskey producers in a public tasting ever. And that's just the tip of the iceberg with the amount of whiskeys I have tasted in the last 5 days. So, since I literally got back, I was debating, should I do this stream at all? Because I thought maybe I should take some time to process, take notes, sort of reach back out to everybody, figure out who I talk to about what and what follow-ups I'm going to do, and maybe do a write-up. But as is my way, I tend to process things really well verbally. So I figured it probably wouldn't hurt to just do a live debrief of everything that happened. So that's what I'm going to try to do today, at least sort of give my basic impressions of what it was like being a press for a spirits industry conference for the first time. My most legitimate role in the industry as yet, which was very cool for me. And also just generally talk about how excited I am for things to come in American single malt whiskey, in craft spirits, and for me. So with that sort of prelude out of the way, Phil, how are you doing today? We haven't talked in a couple of weeks.
I'm doing all right. Uh, I've not actually been drinking terribly much lately. Just a lot of stuff going on. Didn't seem like a good idea. So this is yeah, it's been about a week and a half, 2 weeks since the last time I've poured myself anything. So
Nice.
what do you say we kick it off with something from Colorado? Oh,
Oh yeah, of naturally you grabbed the one thing that I should have a lot of near me because actually they're still in my suitcase. So yes, I agree with that. I'm casting about to see where my samples of Stranahan's are at the moment because I do still have Stranahan's in arm's reach somewhere.
somewhere. I I have two bottles of Stranahan's. I have what I'm pouring now is the Strahan's Original Single Malt, which is their flagship release. Um, oh, uh,
Yep.
sort of
Sorry,
the
I turned my back to the camera as one should not do, but I did find
that's
my
all right.
samples. I was actually tasting them the day I left, which I remembered. That's why they were behind me.
Um, and personally, I believe that this is a good place to start for American single malts in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as long as we're doing our thing. So I have been. This is a great place to start because it is literally how I started my trip. The first thing that I did when I got to Denver was I went to the conference 2 days early. As a matter of fact, the conference officially started on Monday, but there were some semi-official events happening on Sunday, and I decided to go on Saturday or Friday night actually, so I could have all of Saturday to visit Stranahan's and possibly another distillery in the area, which didn't end up happening. I made it to Boulder Spirits on Sunday. So yeah, Stranahan's was my first stop, and I got to sit down with Justin Aiden, and we did a lovely tour. Well, yeah, after the tour, we sat down. First of all, we did a lovely tour through the barrel house. We talked a little bit about the sort of distillery space and like the fermenters and the spirit specs and all that sort of stuff. Which those facts usually it's just large numbers sort of pass in your ear and go out the other, and until you actually look at the numbers next to other numbers, it doesn't really mean a whole lot. But they do have a lot of fermenters in there. I think there were 10. And two of them were just brought online. So that is definitely a sign that they're growing. They are moving a bunch of barrels to a new barrel storage house. So they're growing their storage space, which is exciting. They're ramping up production. And there's a few ways in which this is interesting. People following spirits releases have probably been familiar with the fact that Stranahan's made a big splash with their most recent Snowflake release, which is a bunch of different. Every release is different, unique single cask type stuff. I didn't actually get a chance to do a sample of that or anything like that around when it came out, but I did get to taste it at the distillery. But sort of being more forward looking and sort of detaching from the media cycle, I was less interested in the snowflake and more interested in the general direction of things at the distillery. And one of the really cool things that has sort of come across my desk lately is the Stranahan's Blue Peak, which fits into into one of the sort of angles that I've been handling on the back burner, which is what is a really good entry level priced American single malt that is also good. And I'm pleased to say that Stranahan's Blue Peak is both of those things at $42 and a lovely balanced complex dram that drinks with more intensity but no more heat than the 43% alcohol that it is. I would not have even known unless I was looking at the barrels, unless I was looking at the bottles side by side. The yellow label and the Blue Peak are different proof points, actually. And off the top of my head, I don't remember what yellow label is, but that's what you have in front of you, so you can tell me.
47% alcohol by volume, so
Right.
94 proof.
Right. So at 90 proof, the 94 proof one, the 47% alcohol is a really good standard release. That 47% is above the level where chill filtration is needed. Other sorts of things like that. Really solid core release, but it is $60-ish, if I remember correctly. And that puts it sort of in that line. So I don't know if this is sort of common knowledge, but it does sort of run contrary to, I guess, intuition that so American single malt whiskeys are generally pretty expensive. In the industry, spirits industry broadly, there are terms indicating what price points of various spirits are. And there's a category called super premium that starts at around $40 or something like that. And there's a category called ultra premium, which starts at about $60. And officially, as far as I know, there's no marketing jargon for categories of price at any level above that. You are simply $60 plus your ultra premium. And anything beyond that is sort of a non-technical distinction of what something really expensive is. Why do I bother talking about this? Practically every American single malt fits into the ultra premium category right off the bat. There are very few that come in under it, let alone ones that are good enough to recommend drinking. And Blue Peak is the only one so far that I feel comfortable giving that stamp of approval to. And it is still a super premium product. Yes. It's such an unintuitive thing to call something between $40 and $60 super premium, but that's what it is in terms of marketing jargon.
Well, and I think that speaks to sort of one of the interesting things about the spirits industry is it hasn't changed a whole lot in terms of like market demographics and how it's marketed in the last 20 or so years. And so you get things where like I've seen old ads for like Maker's Mark where like the standard Maker's Mark was marketed at like $25. And that's what is the standard Maker's Mark going for today? And
Off the top of my head, I believe it's about 30.
right, and that's not much creep, but when you think about like, okay, Jim Beam White Label, you know, is about $16 right now. It's one of those things where like sort of the what was once considered a mid-shelf price point, price point, about 16 $17 for a 750, you know, and Jim Beam White Label is considered a middle shelf. A lot of enthusiasts consider it a bottom shelf whiskey, but price point wise and market segment wise, it's about mid shelf because you've got stuff like Senator's Club and like Old Crow, which I think I actually have a bottle of, and I think I have marked how much I paid for it even. I paid $10 for a liter of Old Crow, and it is
Eh,
not even scraping the bottom of the barrel.
right. And it's definitely a you get what you pay for kind of thing with products like
Yeah.
that. I one of the things y'all should watch my reviews, and by watch I mean read. You should just watch out for my reviews that I do in a written form because I tend to be more candid in those. When I'm taking up airtime, I like to keep things positive. So I usually will not talk about unless it's entertaining somehow. I'm not going to talk about things that I don't like particularly, or unless it's relevant to the conversation. I'm not going to talk about things I don't like particularly. Um, and with all the nuance of my rating scale and all that sort of thing, which is sort of rehashed every time I write a review, uh, I am capable of expressing degrees of nuance of things that I find just okay, things that I find to be flawed or poor, but just as many things which are degrees of good. So, verbally speaking, we'll talk about the things that we like, and you're not going to get necessarily the full numerical nuance of exactly how good do I think these things are. But even more importantly, in my reviews, I always put a value rating. So basically ranges from do not buy this to conditionally buy this if it fits your profile, if it fits your budget, that sort of thing, to absolutely you must buy this because at this price it is excellent liquid for the price. And that rating can apply to any price at all. And of course, you're still going to be budget limited, but if you're looking for something in a particular price range and you look through my reviews and you find something that's a 5-star rating on value, that means that you're getting a really excellent value, a really excellent deal, right? The price is uh very, I mean, let's say, I mean, I don't like to say cheap. Cheap is sort of a negative word, right? But like it is a low price considering the quality that you're getting. Essentially is what that 5-star rating means.
Preiswert in German basically means that it is ideally priced, which
Yeah.
uh, can mean inexpensive and high quality, or it could mean, very expensive and very high quality. But basically Preiswert means like it is the ideal value.
Bargain value. Yeah. Although that sort of has an implicit the price is also objectively low.
Yeah.
So here I'm talking about so something like McCarthy's Oloroso at $100 even is a fantastic deal. It's excellent liquid, especially considering the price. And I say that even though I happen to like the McCarthy's 6-year PX better marginally, but that bottle is significantly more expensive. On that note, I wanted to actually cover this today. I found out that the McCarthy's 6-year PX is still available, and I stand by that is a great deal,
You
even
should go buy
though the
some.
price looks a little painful at $120, I think it is. It is well worth it. And the fact that they're sitting on shelves, that one, exactly. The fact that they're still sitting on shelves is probably because they are over $100. Once you get that third digit on the price, people tend to go, whoa, I can't touch that. That's a lot. But really, what you get out of that bottle is so worth it. I highly recommend it. If
I,
you're in
I believe
Portland, go get it.
I believe in my review of it online, I said something along the lines of, if you do not have a bottle of this, go get it now, because
Yeah,
I was writing it under the assumption that it would not be available for too much longer
that's right.
because of the quality of the spirit.
That's right. I wrote that review after I had satisfied the number of bottles I wanted to have on hand, which was immediately, right? I got one, great. I got another one. And then I wrote the review because I wanted everyone else to go get them, but I needed to get mine first. And the fact that
Yeah,
they're still available, first of all, I think it's a bigger batch than we thought it was, as consumers. But
yeah.
also, I really think that the fact that it's over $100 is something that consumers will balk at. And this is one of those opportunities where I have to say, I don't think I gave it a 5-star value because the McCarthy's Oloroso is a 5-star value, incredibly good liquid for the price. The PX is like less marginally incredible, but probably still like a 4-star valued. I have to go look at my review to see what I actually wrote. But point is, this is one of those things where even though that is a hefty price tag, if there was one American, if you can handle smoky whiskey, right? So asterisk, if you handle smoky peaty whiskey, or you're curious to try, if you're good with sweet after dinner drinks, right? So there's always these qualifications, right? Like whiskeys
Yeah.
are never objectively good in all situations, right? Or for all palates. But if you like this specific thing, if this is what you're looking for, if this fits in your budget, if you can afford this, you need to go get the McCarthy's PX. And I dare say, because that bottle came out at the biggest American single malt whiskey public tasting ever and was a hit, there's a good chance that there's going to be more demand for it now than there has been, and your window is closing.
Yes. Not to be one of those people that, sounds like the I can't Kramer meme, but buy now.
Yeah. Buy it now, bin. Right.
Well, I was
Yeah,
thinking of
and
the
you're talking about the stocks guy, right?
yeah, the one with the soundboard.
Oh god. Don't even get me started. Can we move on?
Yes.
So yeah, and as usual, I like to disclose my biases. Caitlin Bartlemay and Joseph O'Sullivan, who used to work for Clear Creek, are personal friends, and so I'm,
Fantastic.
and I also, it happens to be my favorite whiskey, so there is definitely a bias, both in terms of quality and in terms of personal connection there. But I really will stand by. I think this whiskey is really worth going out to get, despite, or yeah, let's say despite the hefty price tag. And I will say yes, reasonably priced given what it is. Absolutely. But let's move on from marketing for a specific product. And this is not an ad, by the way. I'm just a fan. That's always the case.
Yeah.
But I will disclose
I
my
have
bias
some-
there.
I have some startling news. It is out of stock
Okay.
at Sealbox now.
Oh, it happened.
Yeah. It was still in stock at Sealbox last time I checked, and I had considered buying a second bottle and decided against it. It is now out of stock at Sealbox.
Yep. And I'm on my last bottle of it, and I want another one. So I need to hurry. But in fairness, I still send out this PSA. Excellent whiskey, one of the best ones there. So, Clear Creek did enter spirits in the judging competition for the craft spirits competition, but they did not enter any whiskeys. So the fact that there were in the case of McCarthy's that there were no whiskey awards for Clear Creek is not because they didn't judge well; it's because they didn't enter. I believe for a couple of reasons. I asked around; it costs about $500 to enter a bottle for judging. So you'd want to be entering new stuff that you want to make a marketing splash with, not stuff that you've had for 2 years, for example. So it made sense that Clear Creek was entering their, not new formulations necessarily, but it's always based on, right. They entered the Slivovitz and the pear brandy. Those of course are based on, every distinct year's batch of plums and pears respectively. They're always going to taste different, right? Really well made always.
Yeah.
But the really cool thing about this year is that since the last round of ACSA judging, they have a new bottle. So for the brandies specifically. So it made sense for them. I actually didn't ask. I'm editorializing entirely. My read, I could have asked, right? I probably should have. But my editorializing about Clear Creek's entries in this competition is it made sense because they have new bottles. So they want that to continue making a marketing splash. And they did show up really well with those spirits. This is one of those things I'm going to have to go process, right? My personal bias is paying attention to the brands where I have relationships. So I paid attention to Clear Creek, for example, in the awards. I took a picture of every single whiskey award slide that went up. I'm going to go back through them and find which American single malts there were and do a write-up. So look out for that. But this is one of those things I have not had time to process yet. So that's the risk of going into this live stream not having done my homework yet. That I cannot do complete lists in any form. But anyway, let's get back to Stranahans. So,
Yeah.
Phil, what year is your bottle of Yellow Label from? This is important.
Let's see. This is batch number 258.
Sadly, that doesn't mean anything to me. Do you have a
Yeah.
laser etched code or anything like that?
I am looking for a code somewhere on the bottle. There we go.
Or
I do not see a
alternatively,
date, though.
okay. Alternatively, if you just vaguely remember when you bought it.
I bought this in 2022, so not too long ago.
Am
It is
I
a
still
relatively
here?
recent release.
Because my power just went out.
You are still here.
Okay.
Still hear you.
So my computer's
I
on a battery. Yeah, my computer's on a battery backup, but my internet is not. So the fact that the power just went out and the internet didn't die is actually kind of shocking to me.
Do you have BIOS? Or do you have fiber optics?
Do I have what?
Because if you have fiber optics for internet,
Oh, it's fiber.
TV, yeah. So
It's fiber,
what you
but
will
the
have,
router is still electrically powered. Right? It's
what
still
you
plugged
will
into my house.
like that Verizon or your provider installed will include a short time battery backup. Typically lasts between 30 and 45 minutes.
Okay. You're breaking up a little bit. I think my internet may have still glitched a little there. Am I here? Still?
Yeah, you're still here. Yeah. If you want to talk about what your finish your thought on the for me to talk a little bit more, just let me know.
You should talk for a bit about that bottle in front of you while I figure out what's going on here.
Gotcha. So I wouldn't say that I was resistant to picking up Stranahans, but in terms of price point, Stranahan's Yellow Label was in a price point where looking at it as the entry level or flagship malt from them at that price point, you know, for most of my drinking experience, I've been a value shopper in terms of looking for things that are a good price point for what I'm looking for. And, you know, this is going a little bit back to what we were talking about a moment ago about pricing. I have a tendency to pick things up on sale. And so I picked it up when it went on sale year before last now. Because it's 2024 now, which is just sort of, you know, still getting used to. And so went on sale. It was about $50 as opposed to where it's usually priced around here, which is not quite 60. And I think that for the price, it is a good value bottle. I think that it is, like I mentioned earlier, the ideal intro to American single malt whiskey. If you're coming from bourbon, it has all of the, you know, sort of typical bourbon barrel notes that you would expect. That little bit of like cinnamon and, you know, bitter tannin and vanillins and, you know, a little bit of sweetness. But it has that malty richness, the slight chocolatey notes. It has what you look for in a malt and a lot of the flavors that you're looking for in a bourbon. And it isn't a terribly aggressive whiskey. It isn't peated. It isn't, you know, finished in a particularly potent cask. So it delivers a really good, rich core malt flavor with the other elements that are good invitation from people who are typically Scotch drinkers or typically bourbon drinkers. And that's why I think it's a good introduction to American single malt, because you can go from this to theoretically a cask strength Stranahan's, which is, not just, this flagship malt turned up to 11. It has its own distinct character, and you can go from that to something a little bit more out there.
By the way, if as long as we're talking about value, Stranahan's cask strength for some reason is $5 cheaper than the yellow label. And as Phil said, it's the yellow label turned up to 11. Although if you'd have to, this is one of those conditional things. You'd have to either be able to tolerate cask strength or be willing to water it down to sort of take advantage of that value. But that's a shocking value. Although I will say, so Justin Aiden is a head blender at Stranahan's, and he does fantastic work. And I've gotten to see that firsthand as he was taking me through the barrel house. His you pull samples from individual barrels, right? And that's just that's the raw ingredients, right? And the discussion that we were having, regrettably not recorded, because given the busyness of the week, getting sort of clearance to record the various interviews that I did was tough, while also allowing people to be completely candid with me. So instead, I opted to just have those free-form conversations with the promise of an interview later, and sort of just synthesize the information that I got from memory. So my sort of impression of going through the barrel house with him and pulling samples from various things is he really sees everything as an ingredient. And he's always thinking about, oh, that flavor was interesting. That reminds me of this other barrel type over here, or this other specific barrel that would maybe pair well with that. Or this one is a little over oaked, but it's not completely gone. We can work with that in a blend, and sort of make use of the positives of that character and adjust for what the negatives are. And I think Blue Peak is a great example. So Blue Peak is a newer product, and it's entirely Justin's creation, or it's been created entirely under his tenure. He's got the vatting tanks. He told me that he attends to them every day, deciding what type of profile adjustment it needs or how it needs to be amped up. And he's finding barrels to fit into there and pulling them down and getting them ready to go in the vat. And that vat is that sort of Solera vat, if you will, is going constantly. So not only is it a labor of love, it is a labor of making a consistently really good product from sort of the right ingredients, I guess, if that makes sense. And that I used to think of Solera as something that implicitly made things expensive because you've got a lot of barrel management to do. This Solera system is more of an infinity vat. And there's something about that process that seems to make it possible to produce tremendous complexity while going for target consistency and without costing any particularly extra sort of barrel management cost or system management cost, aside from the fact that it needs to be tended to relatively every day. Good question in chat. What is the oldest juice in it? I do not know. I didn't ask. And I didn't ask anything about ages, as a matter of fact. That's kind of an interesting topic because of the variety of aging styles and types of casks and regions and so on. And I'm going to probably deep dive on this in the book when I get around to that, or shorter pieces. Really, the only thing that matters here is the whiskey mature? And like maturation you could argue that maturation never ends, but we all know what over-oaked whiskey is like. I think we've all had at least one or two, at least that are over-oaked to our own personal taste. I know earlier today, even, I tasted a few things that I used to think in the right context is not over-oaked. We did a whole episode about this where I talked about this very thing, essentially. If you start out by tasting super delicate things, and then you go to something which is oaky, which you used to think had a ton of complexity, but just because your palate has tuned in to the sensitivity required for delicate things, and then you blow it out of the water with something super oaky and powerful in flavor, you're not going to get anything from that. So in that context, it's over oaked. Similarly, in the right or wrong context, something could be not mature or over matured. So the only really questions that matter in doing a blend like this, especially a budget blend, is not how old is it, because if you think about it, if you're honest with yourself, if it's important to you, consider the fact that this is the best value American single malt on the market. As long as we're talking about value price point, right? As long as we're talking about budget price point, as far as American single malt goes, this is the cheapest that I know of, particularly from a large brand, that I can recommend. Even if I don't add the that I can recommend, this is also a true statement. It is the cheapest core American single malt from a big brand that I know. And it happens to be really good. If you're honest with yourself and you're asking these questions, what's the youngest, like what's its age statement and what's the oldest juice in it? I mean, with a Solera system, it's hard to tell, right? In this case, it's a stainless vat, so once it goes into the vat, it's not getting any older from a technical perspective. It's not an oak container anymore. So whatever the age of the barrels was that went in, that's it. What I can say is that there were barrels that we tasted on the tour, ranging from, I don't remember if we tasted the 14-year-old barrels, but there are 14-year-old barrels. I personally pulled a sample, which was cool. I got to do some barrel thieving. I personally pulled a sample from a 12-year-old barrel, which happened to be over oaked. 12-year-old sounds good, but in that particular corner of the warehouse or that particular barrel, that wouldn't make a good single barrel because it was over oaked. But you could work with that in a blend. So is it possible that such a barrel is in the Solera system, in the Infinity Vat, if you will, for Blue Peak? Yes. Is it likely? Probably not. It's just the more years on a barrel, the more expensive it is. You'd want to sort of put that in a more expensive product and work with it in that context. But I can't really speak to that. There's certain bits of information that you're not going to get told, right? Unless it's part of their marketing story. And like I said, they knew I was going to be there, but everybody was so busy they couldn't focus on what are you allowed to say or not. So everybody was erring on the side of caution. They could make generalized statements, but they wouldn't get too specific with me because some of that information is not information they would want to get out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think it's probably fair to assume that there is at least some 6 to 8 year old liquid in that blend. But again, I would ask, what does a 6-year-old American single malt whiskey from Colorado mean to you? And then consider, if you go over to Boulder, half an hour away, in Boulder Spirits, the aging profile of their spirits is completely different from Stranahan's. What does a 6 or 8-year-old whiskey from them mean to you in a generalized sense? So I can see why that's valuable to you, but in this particular product, I don't think that's important.
And for the record, this is my bottle of single barrel here, which is handpicked for VAABC. ID 182054 is 4 years and 11 months old. And yeah, color doesn't mean everything, but I mean, look at that, like, rich, dark color.
And they don't add color to their whiskey.
And
I don't recall off the top of my head the answer to whether they chill filter, but I did ask in the case of Blue Peak whether they chill filter because it's at 43%. And I think the answer was something along the lines of, it's not chill filtering the way you'd think of chill filtering. It's sort of being comfortable with the fact that there may be some haze in certain situations, but cooling it down just a little bit and passing it through a filter to just remove some of the heaviest of oils. This asterisk on this may have been something that another brand told me. But I've heard this a few times.
Yeah,
I think it's kind of true across the industry. Stranahan's doesn't make a habit of chill filtering, but if it were appropriate, there's reason to believe that they might. But I can't say that they do for sure. That's something I'm going to have to follow up with a question in an email to get an answer to. But at any rate, it's not hazy, right? That tells you something. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. That is pretty oaky at a month shy of 5 years old. And
Yeah, and
like
I can
every
say
barrel
that
will be different.
yeah, I can say that I think there was a sort of general consensus that that 12-year-old barrel that I happened to sample, because it was sort of right in the front there. So I think it was sort of a well-known one for people on tours asking to sample that. The general consensus on that one seemed to be that it was over oaked. So these things happen, and nobody's trying to hide that fact, right?
Right.
This does happen in a warehouse. Sometimes the barrel's never ready to be released. Sometimes it hasn't found the right product yet.
I mean, there is a small distillery that is currently managing a warehouse system that's basically two warehouses, a grand total of almost 30,000 barrels. I'm talking about somebody in Scotland. I listened to an interview
Oh,
recently with somebody, and talking about you can't put your hands on every single barrel every single day. Now imagine, and this is a relatively small distillery, talking about like 30,000 barrels. Some of which are very old and tucked away in corners, or you know, that's a lot. Like, even if you haven't, you bottle only like 15% of what you produce a year, like that's still like a lot. So, and this is someone who has been, distilling more every year, operating their stills more consistently every year for the past, 15, 20 years. And they're reaching the point where the person who's giving the tour on the video joked that you know there are barrels that you look at and you go, wait a minute, where did you come from? And like
yeah.
things slip through the cracks. Like um, you've got places where even with computer like tracking for every single barrel, if you're producing 300 barrels a quarter, let's say, and you are, say, building, batches of 15, 20 barrels for each, release, you, you know, hopefully are, bottling less than you are distilling or producing, but you're still going to get, an ever increasing number of barrels. And all it takes is for a barrel to get pulled, marked as being in a batch, and then the blender going, no, this one isn't ready, put it back, and then nobody making a note of that. And then, you know, all it takes is, oh, hey, this barrel's been sitting here for an additional 6 years that we weren't anticipating, or, hopefully not that long, but, and then you're looking at a barrel that perhaps hasn't been, you know, touched or thought about.
Yeah. I guess let me just sort of recontextualize this Blue Peak example again. Um, so I've tasted a bunch of whiskeys today, as a matter of fact, because one of our friends from the Whiskey Lodge, Raymond, who's a distiller in Shanghai, happened to be on my flight. We sort of spent, I wouldn't say we spent the whole weekend together. The whole week, I mean, but relatively speaking, the convention is a small place, and we were in the same place often, and we spent a lot of time together intermittently. And we happened to be on the same flight, and he's visiting Seattle for a few days, and I figured I would show him around a bit, to sort of, first of all, I'd invite him to my house. So as big as the convention was in terms of American single malts present, there are a lot of American single. A lot is sort of the wrong term. There are at least several American single malts that are owned by large brands, and per the definition of the American Craft Spirits Association, they no longer qualify as craft because they have a multinational controlling interest, or they're from somebody like Beam or MGP, respectively. Claremont Steep is from Beam. Yellowstone's American Single Malt is from MGP. Diageo owns a few of these brands. Remy Cointreau owns at least one of these brands, and so on. And they no longer qualify as craft spirits. So for that and other reasons related to business priorities and so on, there were a number of brands that were not represented at the convention or the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission, including some very good brands, or at least some notable brands. So since Raymond's mission in coming to the United States for the American Craft Spirits Conference, as well as he's on a bit of a tour, he's so far been to Minden Mills. He visited our friend Joe. He's in Seattle this week to visit Copperworks and Westland. He's going to Portland to visit Westward, and depending on how much time he has and whether he can get a car to go an hour east to Clear Creek, he may also visit Clear Creek. But this is a big trip. He's going to Virginia next. He's going to be visiting Texas. He, of course, visited Colorado, so he got to go visit Stranahan's and Boulder Spirits and talk to a whole bunch of these producers. Long story short, because he's building out a distillery and he has a very good gin, which I've gotten a chance to try now. His mission is to learn as much as possible from American single malt makers, because he'd like to make a single malt and not necessarily stick to the traditional styles that everybody does just because they do them. Which is one of the great things about American single malt whiskey, is that everybody's got a different idea about what it means to make a single malt, and the regulations as proposed allow for a lot of creativity. Also, and maybe we'll talk more about this later, because we're still on, basically in terms of timeline, we're still on Saturday before the convention even.
Yeah.
But one of the people who was there, who is not a member of the ASMWC for basically a technicality, is the head distiller from Brother Justice, or Brother Eustace. I think it's Brother Justice, but it could be the, I don't know. I probably should have asked how it was pronounced. Usually you just pronounce it some way and people go along with it, unless people don't correct you, right? Unless there's a good reason for it. So, but in any case, let's say Brother Justice, which they're in Montana, I believe. They make a cold peated whiskey. They use a hybrid still, and they make use of precise cuts on the heads and the tails in such a way that their distillation proof happens to be above 160. And that technicality disqualifies them from the American single malt whiskey definition as proposed. We have yet to see what actually gets published, so that may not be a permanent thing, but it is, that does mean that his brand is at odds with the commission definition, and so he's not technically a member, but they all respect each other still. And he was, and he came along, he was invited, he came along, he shared his whiskey. It's very good. And if we take a step back from the regulatory labels, the most important thing is this good whiskey?
Product.
Yeah. So, and that comes back again to the question of age statements. I sampled something. So back on, I've got a few things behind me that weren't at the commission meeting or the public tasting. So behind me there is a few bottles from Andalusia, a Copper Fox, and you can't see it, but the Brooklyn 7-year American single malt. Those brands were not represented there. Andalusia, in Raymond's opinion, right, and I guess I can let him speak to this in the Whiskey Lodge in some more detail, but he had different opinions about these from me in some cases, but also agreed with me that even these brands that were not at the commission meeting are really excellent brands, at least in some cases. And some of these other brands they taste surprisingly young for their age, or they taste over-oaked, or, right, for example, we both, considering that we had spent the afternoon tasting really delicate things, we felt that Copper Fox cask strength back there is particularly overpowering. He felt it's over-oaked. I think that's valid, considering that was my sensory perception as well. But I know that bottle, it doesn't look like I've drank much of it because I haven't, but that's also true of everything. Anything that I have a lower level in is because I gave samples away. I've tasted that bottle at least a few times, and I generally find it to be complex if powerful, and I don't know that I would use over-oaked as a term, but that's still a valid criticism. And likewise, compared to what we had tasted, there were some things that I felt tasted young, spirity, bready, that I hadn't noticed before. And so that goes back to, again, the consistency of your sensory is important. Whether you have a fatigued palate is important. And boy, do we have fatigued palates at this point, because we've been doing nothing but tasting for the last 6 days. Let's talk about that for a minute, because I've rattled off a number of bottles, and just a sheer count of the number of things that I've tasted is enough to make you drunk 4 or 5 times over already. I want to say, from a safety perspective, I spent the last 2 weeks before this conference training myself to use a spit cup. This was very important to me because as a journalist, I needed to keep my wits about me. As a newcomer to the industry, I needed to not be seen as a slob. I needed to not embarrass myself. As a person who was trying to build connections rather than take notes, I needed to make sure that my memory would stay intact. So staying well on the side of safe was really important to me. I did a few things to help with that. 1, don't drink everything that's handed to you, especially if you don't like it. Use a dump cup, use a spit cup. And since everyone there is used to this idea that you're going to be dumping and spitting and they're expecting it, in this context, nobody's going to be offended that you did that. In fact, if you'll see on my Instagram, at the giant tasting of every bottle that won an award, and there were like 250 or 300 bottles that won awards that were entered into the spirits competition. And these are thresholds, right? It's not like a ranking necessarily. It's a, did you meet this bar of a grade? Did you meet this bar of a grade? Did you meet this bar of a grade? And then there was the best in show. So that's another thing entirely. But going to a bottle share party of a bunch of winners of a spirits competition where you want to taste everything that sounded at least a little bit interesting to you. The organizers of that party put a dump bucket, a giant dump bucket on every table. And you can see that on my Instagram reels where I took pictures of the tables before people started getting into the bottles. You can see these big empty trays, like just vats of pour yourself whatever whiskey falls into your glass. And when you're done sipping it, dump out the rest. That's it. I got the tip from Nora of Lost Lantern to carry around a coffee cup with me, because if I am unable to spit into a sink and I'm unable to find a dump cup, you can always dump it in your coffee cup and find something later. So those were some tips. Justin encouraged me when I was done tasting a barrel, or if I didn't like a barrel, to simply throw the whiskey that we had in the glass on the floor in the warehouse and just sort of let the angels enjoy. Give it back to the whiskey gods. No need to, it's not like you're carrying around a dump bucket with you when you're walking through the barrel warehouse, but there's no need at all to finish tasting the ounce of whiskey that you pulled out of the barrel. So despite the fact that over the weekend I probably had a sum total of liters of whiskey in my glass at one point or another, I did not consume an appreciable amount of alcohol until the last day or two. And those were deliberate decisions. I had found something that I really liked that I wanted to actually pour myself a full half ounce of and actually sit with it for a while. Or I had a cocktail at a bar after the party, things like that. Anything that was a tasting related item was dump or spit. And bear that in mind, because I have a fun story to share with you later. And I'm going to use that as a teaser to keep you guys listening to my ramble for the rest of the night. And Phil already knows what this is, but I got a kick out of it. I know a few people will. We'll get to that later. So anyway, Stranahan's was a great visit. And one of the cool things, so the reason I asked you what was the year on your yellow label. So mine was probably a 2019 or 2020. Excuse me. You may recall my feeling about the yellow label is that it is malty, it's a high quality honey, and it has not a whole lot else going on.
Yeah.
The yellow label is no longer like that.
Oh, yeah.
The yellow label now is considerably more complex. I would say considerably more mature. Same price point. What's been going on here is that when Justin joined in and sort of took over the blending program, I guess, you have to acknowledge the existence of a flavor profile with your SKU, but you're not locked into it. You're not married to it. It is possible to drift the profile of a product, especially a craft product, over time. And there's an art to doing that. And I haven't tasted. So for the people who are buying your product consistently, they shouldn't feel like they got something completely unexpected when they buy it again, in a few months. But when you're talking about on the order of years, going from the yellow label of 2020 to the yellow label of 2024, there's a considerable difference in that profile. And that change has been intentional on Justin's part to move the profile of that product to something that is more complex and more mature and more enjoyable as a neat sipper and deserving of that price point. Not that the old one wasn't, but it was a lot more singular in its focus, and I didn't particularly fall in love with that bottle until I found a cocktail spec that it worked for. The new yellow label, I would be absolutely happy to sit and sip. It is considerably more complex. Instead of 2 flavor notes, I'm consistently getting 6 or so. Which and without sitting down and doing a deep sensory, that's really good, right? To take a sip of it and immediately go, oh, there's a nose and there's a distinct palate and an evolution and a finish, and I can say 5 or 6 words that sort of describe what that profile is, more or less off the top of my head. That's doing really well in general as a product, and of course no flaws and the usual technical stuff. So those are the 2 products that I typically have in my hands from Stranahan's, the Yellow Label and the Blue Peak. I can recommend both. I would recommend the Yellow Label more strongly now than I did. I owe it to myself, I think, to get a sample of the new Yellow Label and review it again, because 4 years has been a long time, and I know now that it's different. So it's worth a re-review. It's essentially a different product at this point after that much drift. And also, it turns out Justin is a Scotch nerd and a D&D nerd, and we sat bullshitting about the industry for quite a while, actually. As usual, people are extremely generous and give me the benefit of quite a lot of time, even during a busy week. In total, I was at Stranahan's for about 3 hours, 2.5 of which was sitting down with Justin or touring through the barrel house with Justin, sort of taking the insider tour. So huge thanks for that. That was a lot of fun. And by the way, we're almost an hour in and we're still talking about Saturday. So I should speed up the beat here. Sunday was a lot less structured of a day. I had been invited out to Boulder, which, like, I'm in Denver and I don't really know the state very well. So when I was invited out to Boulder on Saturday, I was like, how am I going to pull that off? I'm going to have to sort of give up my whole Sunday pretty much to, like, find someone or get an Uber to take me from one city to another. It turns out Boulder's about half an hour away from Denver, and it actually was not a big deal. And I happened to have a local friend to have lunch with. It was really great to see her. And she was willing to go with me to Boulder Spirits and sort of sit down and do a flight and see the sort of semi-private tour that I had. The intention was that I was going to join up with the Distillers Tour bus. So they had a distillery tour day where they drove everywhere they could reach to every craft distillery in the area around Denver, which included Stranahan's and included Root Shoot Malting and included Boulder Spirits and included Talnua and a whole bunch of others. I didn't go on that tour bus. I had other plans for the day. But for the afternoon, I was going to go to Boulder. And so I got myself to Boulder, and the idea was I was actually going to meet up with the sort of more public tour group that arrived at Boulder at 2 p.m. They were delayed. I ended up showing up at Boulder. I was told that they were delayed, so I was like, okay, cool. We're going to have a more relaxed lunch, and then we're going to head up to Boulder. And so I got there at about 3 o'clock. They were still delayed, and we didn't know how long they would be delayed for. So Ryan Negley and I, and also the owner, Alistair, just sort of chatted about Boulder. I sort of took a brief tour, sort of looked around. It's a much smaller facility than Stranahan's. Their barrels are all pretty much in one relatively small room. Phil, honestly, I think you would be surprised at how small Boulder Spirits is, considering that you've probably heard about them in quite a positive light.
But I will say that me having heard of them isn't necessarily a good indicator, because I have my ear to the ground in a lot of weird circles. So, like, for example, I've heard of distilleries in other places which are very small and or not necessarily very small, but don't have wide distribution, and I have to beg friends to bring me things from them.
Right. That's true. My general impression of Boulder Spirits has been that it actually is fairly available. And that was really surprising when I saw that. So, and not only does Boulder Spirits distill their own spirits, they also take Root Shoot Malting's malt and distills a spirit for them. So, Root Shoot Spirits has a product which is also distilled at Boulder Spirits. And they do all of this on a single still. So, their stripping still and their spirit still is the same still, and they have to clean it between runs. And that's craft.
Mm-hmm.
There's no assembly line process that makes that any better than handling the logistics as best as you possibly can. And they're doing an incredible job. They've got some really good bourbon, at least in my opinion. I'm admittedly not a bourbon drinker. There's me declaring my bias again, or my predispositions. But I thought their bourbon was quite good. They have an unpeated single malt and they have a peated single malt, and I thought both were quite delicious. They are definitely more a bourbon's drinker palate even than Stranahan's. They are leaning in that sort of that oakier direction, but not over oaked. They have that well under control. So it may not be everybody's cup of tea, but I could definitely recommend Boulder Spirits as a place to look if you are more of a bourbon fan looking to try American single malt. And I'll admit I did not take a note of what the prices were, so I'll have to do my homework on that. I do have a sample of Root Shoot Malting that I got to take home with me, which is actually, that's funny that I don't end up having a sample of the Boulder product right away. But so anyway, the intention there actually was that I would sit down and record an interview with them, but the agenda didn't end up making that work because we didn't know when the public tour would be coming through. So we couldn't like set up for an uninterrupted block of time. And once the tour did come through, then we pretty much had to head on to the evening plans. So that sort of brings us to the evening there. There was a benefit. I won't get into the details of that. For one thing, I'm not at liberty to say, and I'm not sure that I would handle it with the appropriate sensitivity to talk about what the benefit was for, other than it was for some beloved friends of the industry, or people in the industry, I mean. Beloved friends of all the people who were there in town for the conference, running a charity event. And that was a lot of fun, and I got to meet some cool people, among whom I got a kick out of this. Miles Monroe recognized me from my voice because he had listened to the 3 hours I recorded with Embellish podcast. So he reached across the table and cheersed me. And I was like, oh, I was just recognized by one of my heroes in the industry. Right. That's a very cool moment. And that was not the first time. That was not the last time that I was recognized by people. And I'm incredibly humbled by the fact that, like, I apparently must be doing something right here with this podcast, or right with the way that I'm handling outreach with brands and everything, because both producers and people from the internet at this point, at least a handful, have recognized me in a public place. And rather than finding that creepy, I know that kind of sounds creepy. Rather than finding that creepy, I'm actually very flattered, right? I announced where I was going to be. So anybody who had an inclination to be there and happened to know that I was there, right? Nobody was showing up to see me. Like, let's be honest, like that's 100%. That's not what I mean. But there were people who knew that I was going to be there and showed up for the thing I was there for and recognized me. And that was cool. So fun moments like that were had. There's really not a whole lot else to say about that benefit. Other than I won a few items at the silent auction. So it was a benefit, right? There was a silent auction. I was sort of, a lot of these items, they had what their expected value was, like their retail value was. And I said, oh, like I can just sort of kick off the bidding by, incrementing this bid to something halfway reasonable that I would be willing to like happen to accidentally win, even if I couldn't make use of, say, a tour at Talnua or a tour at Boulder Spirits that I've already gone on, right? Mm-hmm. I don't need those items, but I can, boost the bid, right? So I ended up bidding on like 7 things. A lot of those bids were defeated, but I did win 3 of them. And so ultimately, I think, according to what they had written down, I ended up winning $1,000 worth of stuff for a little under $200 total. And one of the things that I won was a full case of Boulder Spirits, 6 bottles. I was not able to take that home with me. So the way in which I will receive that case is TBD, but I find that amusing. I did donate the tours to to local friends. I let the brands know, like, hey, I'm not local, but I'm more than happy to, you know, honor that I won this sort of lowball silent auction and donate these items to whoever can use them that I know locally. Um, but yeah, the Boulder Spirits is coming one way or another eventually because I did win a case of Boulder Spirits, and that is funny to me. So there's, I get the single malt, the bourbon, some gin, I think. Just a whole. It was a stock your bar with Boulder Spirits package. So that'll be fun. I want to say there was an after party, but that sort of thing was not particularly information filled, other than making some connections, rubbing elbows and so on.
Networking.
Yeah. And now finally, right at the end of Sunday, yeah, networking is a huge part of this. So at the end of Sunday, right, it's time to get ready for the actual conference. And at this point, I've already not slept for more than a few hours a night for a few days in a row. And that's one of the reasons that I'm super tired now. Believe it or not hungover. I'm actually kind of amazed at how well my strategy worked in terms of health and safety. That I was very judicious about choosing how much alcohol and when I would consume. To the point where, despite the fact that I was surrounded by delicious spirits for 6 days, there were no incidents of getting sick or, and just in general, there were some public consumers at the conference and in other places that were not as judicious. So there were sloppy individuals, but I have no memory of anyone whose name I would know, being in any sort of a situation that looked untoward, right? I guess regrettably, I did hear of some instances of harassment against the women representatives in the industry. I'm incredibly disappointed in my gender that such things are still happening, that people are not appropriately guarding their behavior, because these people are there to represent their brands, not to be flirted with, not to be touched. I can't even begin to understand the mentality that goes into that, and
It's
I have no
extremely
words.
disappointing, and it's something that is pervasive in this industry, as it is in many others. And it is something that a great number of individuals in this community and in the industry are making great strides in stamping out. But there is, as always, still more room to grow.
Yep. Interestingly, there's a good segue here. When I entered the trade show on Monday morning, I went to the ribbon cutting. You can see that on my Instagram. There's still more posts to come because I was so busy that I couldn't actually post. After the ribbon cutting, the first booth that I went to was the Step Up Program Foundation. If you don't know what that is, they are a sort of I'm not going to do justice to this. This is another one of those places where I should have done my homework to be able to give an elevator pitch about what this is. But the Step Up program is basically a training program and internship program for people of some diversity description to be able to get the training that they need and the position and like entry level positions in the interest in the wow words
Spirits
in
industry.
the industry. Oh, howdy, Outlaw. Thanks for joining in. I
Cheers.
somehow I suspect that I'm going to be seeing a lot more of industry people watching the podcast, and I'm thrilled that that is the case. Thank you so much for joining in. So Step Up Foundation are also the people that created the Good Deeds blend of American single malt whiskeys, which is a fantastic bottle. It was good when I first opened it. It's even better with some air. Per that charity that I mentioned, a bottle of Good Deeds was up for auction, and it was one of the only ones that were in that sort of low price category that went for well above its value. I think it's like an $80 value, and all of that goes to the Step Up Foundation as a donation to help the cause. And any additional that bottle, of course, was donated to the benefit, and the full price of the winning bid was donated to the cause at the benefit. the bottle of Good Deeds went for $200. And if that doesn't say something about people's support for that program, I don't know what does. That there were so many other cool things you could have had at that silent auction, and yet people went out of their way to increase the bid on that particular item because they wanted it, because they wanted to own a thing that showed that they supported a diversity program in the industry. I thought that was very cool. I think that's a detail that probably flew under the radar because I'm the only nerd who would be staring at the actual winning bids on these things during the auction, because it was like a mobile phone app and like all that sort of stuff. Like, you win something at auction, great. If you don't, who cares, right? And I was really interested to see what people were willing to pay for these auction items, and that was a standout. So that was cool. The rest of the, I'll be honest, the rest of the sort of trade fair exhibit hall would be, let's put this in sort of, I guess, the most useful, productive way, would be disappointing to a consumer attending the conference, because the trade fair was definitely a business to business type of thing. There were some whiskey samples there. I think that was unofficial. Maybe you have to have a DSP or some other thing, but there was some kind of rule that prevented most of those booths from actually offering samples of booze. Probably for the best, because there were plenty of other opportunities to drink throughout the conference, and the trade fair, the trade show exhibit hall did not need to be that place, right? Unless it was particularly relevant. There was some kind of an electrolysis type treatment that was supposed to help whiskey taste more mature, or at least smoother. Funny enough, I heard about this indirectly from a producer of vodka, who said that what that treatment had done to vodka was make the vodka taste like water, and they felt that was a bad thing. And I agree. I don't think that you should make your spirits so smooth that you can't tell that you're drinking. I have my sort of go-to story about my Black Russian that I put a new vodka in that didn't have as much of a bite as it used to have, and I thought I didn't put enough, so I doubled it, and then I couldn't finish writing my term paper.
Yeah.
These things can be dangerous. There's something that you're generally looking for in a spirit, and a sort of rapid aging and fixing your spirits is perhaps a commercialization tool, right? You've got product that you need to commercialize, you need to make a profit of. Businesses run like businesses. Who can be upset about that? But as a consumer, I don't want to find out. I would be disappointed to learn that somebody had done a non-traditional treatment on whiskey to make it appear to be something that it is not.
I mean, there is the old adage, you can cheat many things, but you can't cheat time. I think it's something along the lines of, you can cheat at cards, you can cheat a man, but you can't cheat time.
Yeah. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and I'm sort of not in the right state of mind to discuss any kind of science here, but there are certain things that only happen with time. There are certain things that only happen with the correct sized oak container that you can't replicate with a smaller container, that you can't replicate with agitation, that you can't replicate with supersonic aging. There was one of the particularly standout, I was impressed by the presentation, let's say. There's a product called Modern Cooperage, I think. Go check my Instagram. I sort of wrote a paragraph about this already. What they make is basically an inside-out barrel, where what they built was a 75-gallon keg that they put racks in, that you can put staves inside of the liquid in the barrel. And they have a turnstile that you can use to agitate the barrel whenever you choose, as much or as little as you want to. You probably can already guess my objections to such a thing. The most important thing, and I actually told the producer this on the spot. This, I'm 90% certain, will not count as an oak container and therefore will not contribute to anyone's age statement. And so anyone who is trying to make a straight bourbon or so on will not be able to use this product. Right? That's the biggest concern. He says they're trying to address that with the TTB. I am dubious about how quickly that will be achieved, if at all, because something as powerful as the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission and the movement around American single malt whiskey has not prompted the TTB to be particularly quick in their legislation.
I would also like to point out that even if, legally speaking, such a device was permitted for the use of aging as straight bourbon, for example, in spirit, I think is against that principle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm against such a product in principle. As a whiskey enthusiast, I think I would feel the same way about the use of such a product as I would feel about the hypersonic aging of ultra small barrels, or the sort of targeted flavor development by use of less than entirely natural means to the spirits production process. Not to be too specific with examples because I don't like calling out brands in a negative way. And I'll say, pardon me.
Of course. While you take care of that, I will go ahead and talk about Mr. Corbin Black's question for a moment. So, as a barrel ages, you do lose volume of it, be it water or alcohol, to the air, called the angel's share, and some to the interior of the barrel. And that does increase the surface area of the spirit that is exposed to air. I will say that oak barrels are remarkably good at being watertight. Due to the grain structure of white oak, they hold liquid very well. For the barrel to get to a point where you have an appreciable level of volume drop to get increased surface area exposed to air. And that helps the aging process because oxidation of the elements within the whiskey, interaction with the barrel, which is dependent on time, temperature, barometric pressure, humidity, everything goes into change the end product. And so time, and time exposed to air, time exposed to the oak is a vital element of the final product. Yeah, exactly. And it really can't be rushed.
Yes.
There are people
Yeah,
who
I'll
have
put that up
tried.
as well.
Yeah. There are
Yep.
people that have tried. I have seen alleged patent applications from as far back as like the 1960s. And they just, you know, they never took off because they just don't really work. You can't really change. You can break down the molecular structure of a whiskey and build it back together, but you still probably won't get something quite right. It's hard to explain. There is an element of magic that goes into creating whiskey.
Yep. Welcome to the stream. I think for the first time, KCO's Dookie Jar, I believe. I think there was supposed to be a pun on cookie jar there.
Yeah.
Welcome. We are talking about the Craft Spirits conference that I just returned from. If you're not familiar with my channel, I'm I guess most humbly I should say I'm a whiskey writer and I'm a whiskey podcaster. I probably shouldn't put any labels on myself. I already have expressed that I feel uncomfortable with the term expert. Uh, but it's certainly when I'm presenting myself to industry people, I do present myself that way, and maybe there's something to that. But anyway, yeah, we're talking about spirits industry products and so on. So I hope that's interesting to you. We will talk a bit about some drinking later. So if that's of more interest to you, stick around for about 20 minutes. Right now, we're covering a trade show, which is frankly kind of boring, and I probably want to breeze past it because that is not the best content in the world.
That's right.
But yeah, a little bit about this. So more on sort of the technicals of this inside out barrel. It's a keg. It's a stainless steel case. Another feature that they have is a glycol jacket, so you can control the temperature, either heating or cooling, of the barrel if you want. So this sort of controlled temperature cycling, I think it's an interesting idea. But as you said, the problem is that there's no breathability in this thing. There was one concession on that point in the design of this barrel, which is that there is about a 2-inch diameter hole, which is basically the bung hole, right? The place where you would fill and empty the barrel.
Right.
That they had a membrane to cover. And this membrane was purported to allow oxygen to flow through, but not allow your volatile product chemicals, right? Your alcohol, your congeners, your flavor molecules, your any sorts of things to escape. There's a few reasons I think that's a bad idea. First of all, as we were talking about sort of the oxidation question, if you have an otherwise inert chemical environment and you expose it to oxygen, oxidation will happen, and then it will complete. Given the chemical environment, there will be no more oxidation. You're done. This is a vast oversimplification, but this inside out barrel actually is the extreme case that person who wrote the article that once your whiskey is in a barrel, oxidation cannot happen anymore because it's already happened in the barrel. This is one of the extreme cases that actually matches that point, because oxidation is allowed to happen and no other chemicals are allowed to escape. This actually sounds plausible because oxygen, O2, is a very light and small molecule that get through a nano-sized membrane. And every other molecule that you would care about that you could taste is a much larger molecule. In theory, I believe the claim. And so taking that as an assumption, the fact that the barrel is not allowed to breathe, that these lighter volatiles are not allowed to escape the barrel, right? As we know, the angel's share, and one of the things they're trying to do is prevent the angel's share, to prevent the amount of your product being lost during aging. It's an interesting idea, but they're missing the point that the angel's share is a vital part of the process. The loss of some of that alcohol and the heavy and the larger than oxygen molecules that make up flavor compounds that you wouldn't want, your sort of headsy flavors, your sort of acetone and your isoamyl, your isopropyl alcohol type things that could potentially end up in your product if you've taken a high heads cut, for example. You want those things to escape the barrel. You want those things to age out. You want them gone. You want these chemicals to continue diffusing out of the barrel so that the fresh air that's coming in has an opportunity to continue reacting with the chemicals in the barrel and creating new esters and new flavor compounds. The very things that make whiskey mature require the breathability of oak. There's a reason that oak containers have been used to make brown spirits. It's because that amount of airflow, it's not just about the wood contributing flavors. It's about what the breathability allows to escape. And tighter woods and other sorts of containers don't achieve that. So this mere concession that we're allowing oxygen to flow through and nothing else doesn't solve that problem the way that oak does. It doesn't even come close. That's my personal opinion. There are probably products on the market that are going to be interested. Yeah, that's a great comment. It's definitely apropos of the conversation. I was sick of listening to some YouTube channel that described the angel's share as if it was some market share a corporation could capture. It felt greedy and naive. Yes, Corbin Black. That is basically how I feel about that. That's a good observation. I think that's the correct way of thinking about it. I will add to that, I won't name names. Somebody that I was speaking to candidly in the industry, that was a lovely thing about being off record for the whole week, by the way, is that I got to have so many candid conversations that I can anonymously quote in some cases, and I can synthesize into a generalized knowledge in other cases. Someone in the industry who I won't name said the number of things that guy knows about barrel aging is very few, or something along those lines. It was actually much better put than that, to be honest. I felt it was quite a good quip, right? Or it was something along the amount that guy knows about barrel aging is very little. I thought was clever and cute, and I completely agree because I mean the engineering of the product aside, right? I'll say, in fairness to the product, in fairness to the presenter, it was a good presentation because it was intriguing. It made you want to pay attention. It made you want to think and ask questions. It didn't make me want to encourage anyone to use that product. I have concerns. I have opinions. I think in general it's a bad idea. I think I wouldn't like to know. I wouldn't like to learn that my whiskey was aged that way. Um, yeah, I don't like to bash. I feel like I've done maybe an unfair amount of bashing of this product. But the reason why is not because I think it's a bad product. I appreciate the engineering. I appreciate the thought. I think there's something there for some products that are going to want to add natural wood flavor and color
Just write
in.
off as loss in
Yeah, sorry, I missed half of that sentence.
sorry.
Could you repeat
My
that?
internet is apparently, it brings to mind a lot of other, methods and sort of almost gimmicky things that other companies have used to sort of harness what other companies would write off as loss in the aging process, sometimes with mixed results.
So yeah, and actually, on that note, that particular product was one of the things that presenter brought up. The devil's share, right? The
Yeah.
liquid that is so called lost to the wood, right? It's not just the angel's share that evaporates and is gone forever. It's also the liquid that the wood absorbs, as if that's a problem that needs to be recaptured, right? There's if you think of alcohol is the product, if you take the approach to making whiskey that yeast is for alcohol production, not for flavor, that whiskey and every other product, every barrel aged product is about. I mean, I buy that a lot of vodka brands are about creating alcohol for cocktails, and all that matters is that there's alcohol in it and that there's a market segment that they can market to, and I don't fault them for that. That is a valid market segment. It's not my preferred market segment, but it is a valid market segment. If we're talking about the spirits business, I think that there is a valid market segment. There's a term I learned at this conference called white space. I would probably have known it by other things in different industries, but the way the spirits industry was thinking about white space, that is, there is a segment of the industry that nobody's covering. White space is interesting because it could be an opportunity for a brand to fill a void in the market, some addressable segment of the market that's not being served with some product that nobody's doing. That's white space. Just because white space exists does not mean it's a good idea. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that product is going to be successful. It doesn't mean people are going to buy or like that product. So just because white space exists doesn't mean that you should try to make a product to fill the white space. You're going to be much more successful making a product with integrity that addresses an authentic portion of the market that you care to address, right? To make something with quality, or to know that what you're trying to do is make a well vodka for your specific small town in the middle of nowhere, right? That's valid. That scale of super small craft distilling that needs to serve a purpose, that wants to distill a few things with little regard to quality, let's say, because you're filling out your bar at a tasting room related to your distillery in a small business fashion. There's an addressable market there of people who are close to you. The right answer for a distillery is not always be bigger, reach farther. I think that's important for people to understand. There's a lot of craft spirits that are only as good as they need to be, that are only as expensive as their market can tolerate. And even within that constraint, they're only as good as they can be, given the constraints. Right? And they're only as big as they can be within those constraints, and they're not necessarily aiming to be bigger. There's nothing wrong with that. Perhaps the number of such brands that exist are the reason that certain people think that craft distilling is a dirty phrase, that craft spirits are bad, or other such ideas. When in fact, everybody has the opportunity to make a good product, and everybody has the opportunity to make a better product than they did the last time. Just because you've had a bad product from a brand doesn't mean that brand will always be bad. It could just mean that they were small, that their product was immature, they were growing and learning and getting better. The number of brands I saw at the conference itself, at the booths, at the seminars, I don't mean this in a disparaging way. There were questions being asked that I, a non-producer, knew the answers to. There's nothing wrong with that. I have made it a point to study the industry, but I also will acknowledge that I'm not a producer and I have no hands-on experience whatsoever doing these things, doing the math on how much grain I need to make how much wash, to put into how many fermenters, to put into what size stripping still, to put into what size spirit still. I think I know the answers to these questions because I have a litany of case studies that have given me these answers, but I've never made a distillery. If I was going to, I don't know what the answers would be for me, right? But the point I'm trying to make is that there were people there who were relatively new and who were genuinely trying to learn and grow, and I thought that was awesome. And it made me take a beat and think about what I think I know and about what I think is right, against the fact that there are so many brands out there that are targeting different segments of the market, that are doing different things than I'm necessarily paying attention to, that are all perfectly valid. And those very same brands won awards from the professional judges, validating that there's nothing wrong with that, right? You can be an existing brand that is making products that I'm one reviewer, one spirits writer, podcaster, have opinions about, good or bad. And you can still win awards from somebody who knows that segment of the industry, with the appropriate nuance for what the market segment expects, which is not me. I'm not that person, right? I've been humbled as much as anybody by this conference. I should be humbled more than the people who have hands-on experience, and I think I was, right? There was a question earlier. What was the general reception to that barrel? I did see people who were intrigued by it and wanted to try it. The producer of that of the modern cooperage barrel does have actual customers, does have a number of units, has multiple revisions of the design in the market. There are people using this. From a legal standpoint, I don't think anyone is using it to add age to their products from an age statement perspective, because I'm 99% sure that it is not legal and would not be accepted by the TTB. And there's enough paperwork involved in getting labels approved by TTB that there's a really good chance that it wouldn't pass. Although I may be surprised to learn that there are things that fly under the radar that shouldn't. I think we all kind of get that's the case.
It would not surprise me if there were things that flew under the radar that we don't know about, or that we haven't noticed yet. because there are things that fly under TTB radar. Poor wording that would, upon closer inspection, disqualify labels. Um, uh, Not labeling the DSP number for the distillery that produced a product, or noting where it was distilled. All things that sneak through TTB on a regular basis.
And
And
sometimes
I'm
get caught by savvy consumers and other sorts of people and called
right,
out and corrected.
or not corrected.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then a whole bunch of people got banned on Instagram by having a certain product, a certain comment to say about a certain product, and I'm not going to go there on YouTube.
yeah. I
Um,
just I can pull 4 barrels, or sorry, not barrels, bottles, 4, 5, 6 bottles of craft spirits that are produced by NDPs that do not correctly label their spirit.
and that's a relatively minor sin.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a little
I mean,
thing.
as
That's a detail.
in terms of letter of the law, it's a violation, right? But like in
Yeah.
terms of what the consumer cares about, I can find out if something was MGP or
Yeah.
Bardstown or whoever, even if it wasn't properly disclosed on the label. Uh, by the way, I
Real.
talked to the Bardstown people at the booth, which
Ooh.
are, you know, they make their own products, but they also serve bulk contract distilling contracts. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I learned is that they do have American single malt laid down. It's not mature yet. They don't have a product, and they don't have bulk buyers for that product. But
Yeah.
they do have American single malt laid down, and that's an interesting development that I didn't know about before.
I'm looking
So
forward to that.
yeah, I'm excited to try it. I without comparisons are hard to make without sounding negative. Let me just say I am interested to see more bourbon brands entering the American single malt whiskey, like well established bourbon and rye brands entering into American single malt whiskey, because they have a completely valid perspective on the market, which is American consumers like bourbon. Bourbon is what American consumers think American whiskey is. And American single malt whiskey that isn't at all like bourbon is not going to reach those consumers. It's a valid
Yeah.
point of view, which I happen to disagree with. I think I need to work on going through the argument in my brain here, but I would like to believe that my efforts in writing an educational book about American single malt whiskey for the general consumer of whiskey would have some chance of being successful at bringing people step at a time away from bourbon and into the vast variety of American single malts that have so many good flavors that you can't achieve, in my opinion, if you stay too close to bourbon. If what you're aiming for is a barrel-driven profile with minimal spirit profile to it, which is essentially, I mean, leaving aside the choice of grain, which is essentially what separates bourbon from rye from malt whiskey. The part of American single malt whiskey which overlaps with malt whiskey, uh, you can qualify as both whether you're column or pot still. And if all you do is go from column to pot, you've taken a step away from bourbon. If all you do is go from new oak to used oak, you've taken a step away from bourbon. And if you take enough of those steps, you end up at Stranahan's, you end up at McCarthy's. And those products, I mean, Stranahan's is only a few steps away from bourbon. They use number 3 char new oak and finishing casks. That's their sort of distillery barrel program. And what then their product, though, by flavor profile, is several steps further away from bourbon than it sounds like it should be, right? Westward is another example of that, where some of the steps they've taken away from bourbon are they're again using number 3 char barrels, but they are fermenting a beer quality wash, and they are using a pot still and a few other choices in barrel management that take it quite a few steps away from bourbon and give you something completely different. Somebody asked me what somebody who was not a producer of whiskey at the convention asked me what I would recommend for somebody who was brand new to American single malt, and I said, first of all, my favorite American single malt is McCarthy's 6-year PX. Do you like smoky whiskey that is sweet? If so, I recommend that. He said, nah, I'm not really into smoky whiskey. Sweet's fine. Okay, in that case, I recommend Westward Pinot Cask. That has been my number one comfort whiskey for a long time. It's consistent. It's delicious. It's everything I need it to be when I need it to be it, if that makes sense. And also, if you were to pick any other of Westward's products, speaking to the consistency of the blending team and Miles Monroe, master blender, pretty much, not universally, but pretty much all of Westward's products are the same core 90%. And 5 to 10% difference introduced by the choice of cask, or a slight difference in fermentation profile, or a slight difference in not like barrel type, but like the finishing barrels. Slight difference in the grain that goes in. And in some cases, these make really delicious, interesting whiskeys that really teach you something about whiskey production, because you can rely on Westward as a brand to deliver the same. I'll answer that question in a moment. You can count on Westward as a brand to deliver the same profile for the most part, again and again, in every special release that they do. But these small tweaks teach you, oh, a wine barrel does that. Oh, a rum barrel does that. Oh, change to Vienna malt does that. Oh, a cognac cask does that. But mostly the profile of that release is what you'd expect Westward to be, right? And so I recommended one of the brands I would recommend for an introduction to American single malt whiskey is, and that's good, right? Like really good, is Westward, because no matter what you get from them, you can count on it. That's really important. That's the importance of blenders. That's the importance of being true to your sensory targets, which was a brilliant seminar that I attended by Mark Vierthaler of Whiskey Del Bach, who's a lovely person. He's so friendly, and I think just that he's been so busy is the reason that we haven't managed to successfully snag him for our podcast yet, but that'll happen soon, I imagine. Also incredibly knowledgeable and really good at, he gave a whole panel or a whole seminar hour on sensory analysis and how to do it effectively and consistently, and to not sort of cheat yourself out of properly evaluating your products from beginning to end. I learned a lot. So as this was a conference for industry people, creating products, going to consumers, moving your products to bars, improving your production methods, that sort of thing. That's what this conference was mostly about. Business people to learn about how to make their business better. I, as a consumer, a reviewer, a whiskey writer, learned how to be a better reviewer by paying attention to the details that producers are paying attention to make better products. The sensory work that they do in making sure that their products are consistent and high quality is way more detailed and rigorous than what I do as a reviewer giving a subjective opinion about products. There is a lot for me to learn from following that example, and I'm even more encouraged by all that to actually go take the WSET Level 2 Spirits course, because one of the modules in there is being able to do sensory analysis, which is important to me as a reviewer. So I think I will sort of prioritize doing that. Now to answer Genji's question, what is bourbon exactly? So we have a whole episode about that somewhere in the archives. But in short, bourbon is American whiskey that is made with at least 51% corn in the grain recipe. the other grains, whiskey has to be made from grains, so the other ingredients all have to be grains, but they could be rye, they could be wheat, they could be barley. Those are the typical ingredients, but it has to be at least 51% corn, and it has to be aged in a new charred oak barrel. There's some other details, but as a consumer, that's really all you need to know to sort of conceptualize what bourbon is. And when I'm talking about taking steps away from bourbon, the most obvious step going from bourbon to American single malt is the fact that American single malt is 100% barley. So that by itself is actually a rather large step away from bourbon. But given that bourbon producers tend to distill their grain recipe in such a way as to mostly capture a lot of alcohol and strip out a lot of flavor, using what's called a column still or a continuous still, which captures a lot of ethanol and removes a lot of the other sorts of nuance in the flavor of the beer, for lack of a better term, that gets distilled. So you start with a beer, you run it through some kind of a still, you get alcohol as a starting point. And what they do in bourbon typically is make a pretty neutral alcohol, not vodka, but something that has a relatively neutral flavor that is bourbony, which is not at all a helpful descriptor. But if you've tasted some bourbons and you've tasted bourbon new make, it makes sense how you got from the clear spirit to the barrel-aged version of that same thing. And a lot of those producers think of the barrel as being sort of 80% or 70% of the flavor of bourbon. It is entirely possible to take your 100% barley mash bill, distill that in such a way as to strip out most of the flavor, and put it in new charred oak barrels that contribute 80% of the flavor of the final product, and say, okay, that 20% that wasn't the barrel, it used to be a bourbon mash, and now it's 100% malted barley. That's a step away from bourbon. And that, when you put it in that context, it's a relatively small step. But you could also take the huge step of saying, we're not going to do anything like a typical bourbon. Aside from the mash bill being 100% barley, we're going to do it on a pot still, which lets a lot of additional flavor complexity come through into that new make spirit. We're going to put it into refill barrels, meaning that they're not new charred oak. They're not super aggressive. They don't contribute a ton of flavor right away. They allow the spirit more time to sort of mature on its own without adding a ton of flavor to it. We are going to put it in a finishing barrel and give it a bit of a wine influence. We're going to introduce peat smoke into the barley at the early stages, but I'm just talking about more steps. And once you've done all of those things, and oh, by the way, the oak container is going to be Garyana oak instead of American white oak. Now we have McCarthy's, right? We've gone from bourbon, and we've changed absolutely every typical decision about the process of making whiskey. And we ended up on the far side of whiskey with all of those decisions pretty much completely reversed. And we have McCarthy's. And I'm literally not exaggerating. And this is not to say the farther away from bourbon it is, the more I like it. It just so happens that I really like McCarthy's, and it's almost the farthest thing on the planet from bourbon.
What's really cool is that there are some people who make peated bourbons and peated rye.
Yeah, it turns out that's a
County,
step you can take. Yeah.
Liberty Pole. Copper Fox makes a bourbon that their 20% barley component is smoked with peachwood.
Yep. The Andalusia Revenant Oak, I believe, is smoked with hardwood instead of peat or anything of that description. Raymond really liked that one, by the way. He liked that one. You see the one over my shoulder that is missing the shoulder? Yeah. I gave Raymond a 2-ounce sample. He liked it that much. He went home with a sample of that one.
Excellent.
Oh, my mistake. The Revenant Oak is the peated whiskey. The Striker is the hardwood smoked whiskey. I happen to also like that. Raymond liked it too, but not enough to take a sample. He really liked the Revenant Oak, which is the peated Andalusia American single malt. Andalusia is the name of the distillery, by the way, not the region of Spain. Spelled slightly differently. It is related in how they derived the name and all that. Blah blah blah. I have an interview with them, which I have been too busy to edit, and it's a really good interview, and I really want to get that out. Somebody needs to hold me accountable. I also need an editor. Please, please, somebody volunteer to edit for me because I'm doing too much research to also sit and edit videos. Yeah, no problem. Always happy to clarify sort of the definitions and the jargon that we use because it's a lot more fun for us if our audience understands what we're saying.
And it's easy for us to forget that we take for granted what we know as potentially common knowledge when it really isn't. I didn't. I am so deep into being a spirits nerd that I didn't realize that I had to explain to someone the difference between a pot still and a column still recently, and it took a couple tries for me to figure out that that's where the miscommunication was happening.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I and Raymond and I explained what the difference was between a column and a pot still today at Boon Boona Coffee. So skipping ahead, I suppose. Okay, let's real quick touch on some bases. So there was the trade show. There was
Yes.
seminars. I've talked in broad terms about what I've learned at those seminars. There were parties in the evening, after parties, and so on. There were tasting. The really important thing I haven't talked about yet is that Monday night of the convention was something that wasn't part of the convention proper. It was the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission meeting. I was invited as press and as a friend of the commission, not a member proper, because I'm covering American Single Malt Whiskey, and I know enough of the right people that they were happy to have me in the room. Uh, I can't really say much about like the contents of the meeting. It was more or less a private meeting, but more on the point. It's kind of boring. Essentially, for the moment, no news. Right? Nobody knows when TTB is going to approve the the regulation. We from the outside can tell that. That's sort of confirmed by the commission on the inside. The rest of it was essentially bookkeeping, right? Like sort of relatively boring stuff that is not of interest to the consumer segment. Although maybe I can do something with some of that information. But far more important was the fact that right after the meeting, there was a massive bottle share party among the producers and the guests of that commission meeting, where everybody brought some representative product of theirs, shared it with everybody else, gave their feedback and opinions about these products. And frankly, there were brands I had never heard of that were more delicious than I could have imagined, that I want to know more about. There is at least one brand that I now know of that I like and happens to have small format barrels, which is really cool for me because one or two of those brands were open to letting me source a barrel for aging coffee. And that's why I went over to Boon Boona Coffee this afternoon with Raymond and excitedly told Ali, I think I found barrels for you. They'll be ready in about 3 months. The question is, do you want 15 or 30 gallons? And when do you want to taste the sample? So that's a cool thing that's coming. That coffee collaboration sadly may happen before my single barrel gets released. Some news on that single barrel. I used Raymond as a sensory sort of reinforcement because I had some thoughts about the barrel that I couldn't necessarily square whether I was being biased or whether they were genuinely positive qualities.
Mm-hmm.
He has entirely confirmed without me pushing him absolutely everything that I thought was great about this barrel pick. He independently confirmed all of the things I thought were really cool about it. And that makes me all the more excited to go ahead with doing this barrel pick and with confidence feeling like the people who buy it will be absolutely pleased with the quality and flavor of that liquid. I still can't say anything until there's paper signed.
Yeah.
So I can't
Yeah.
tell you what it is. Not publicly. So look forward to it, I guess is all I can say. Um, so the commission meeting. Thank you, Andrew. I know Andrew does enjoy the quality liquids, especially bean juice,
Ah,
which is our inside joke. I used to drink tea. I don't really drink tea anymore, and he used to make fun of me for drinking leaf juice. This is my former roommate, by the way, people.
ah.
Um,
So,
thanks for dropping in, Andrew.
so after the single malt commission meeting, uh, and then there was the big bottle share where you got to try a bunch of stuff. That ends that day, right?
Yes, that
So,
commission meeting was essentially a 2 hour affair. I actually stayed an hour late. And the reason I stayed an hour later, well, first of all, the public American single malt whiskey tasting, the one that you had to buy $25 tickets to that was held at the 7 Grand in Denver, basically every American single malt producer that was qualified as craft. No, not even. Anybody who was a member of the ASMWC could have a booth there. There were supposed to be 25 brands there. By my count, there were 13. I'm not sure what I think there's an entire room that I missed, to be quite honest. I'm not entirely, because I have the list of people who were supposed to be there, and I know that they were at the commission meeting, and they said they were going to be at that tasting, and I just didn't see them. So I'm not really sure what happened. But I, funny enough, was busy like talking to people that I knew more than I was busy tasting those whiskeys, because a lot of them I had already tasted at the commission meeting, or I had tasted them in the past. And I was actually acting in a sense as an industry rep, introducing the public, introducing the public people who had walked into that to what I thought were the really good things that they shouldn't miss. So, I would be drinking something and say, "Oh, what are you drinking?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm having the Del Bach Dorado, which is really good. You should go over there and try that and talk to the distiller. He's hanging out." Stuff like that. There was somebody that I sort of introduced to all of the Westland malts that were there. There were a couple of people that I said, make sure you don't miss that McCarthy's. And Hinter House in the Sonoma Valley in California, it turns out that the wife of the duo has a very similar life story to mine in terms of where we grew up and lived and moved to, such that if I were to make a move to Sonoma Valley, I would have followed the exact same path as they did. And that was really fun. And they are one of the people that I am talking to about sourcing a barrel. That sort of
excellent.
personal connection made that really easy to sort of do. So yeah, that public tasting was really cool to see the amount of enthusiasm that came from the public. The number of people that were discovering American single malt for the first time and going, "Oh my God, I didn't know whiskey could taste like this. I didn't know whiskey could taste this good." I'm not exaggerating. At least 3 or 4 different people I heard saying words to that effect. So that can only be good news, right?
Yeah.
Stranahan's was there, Boulder Spirits was there, McCarthy's, Hinter House, Westland, Del Bach, 291, which is a Denver local, I believe. I'm sort of walking my brain around the room. Lost Woods Whiskey was there. This was a brand that I found out about recently, and really sweet guy. It's basically a one-man show, Lost Woods Whiskey, and my take on the whiskey so far is that it needs a bit more age, and besides that, it has a lot of promise. And he wanted to speak with me directly, I guess, as a consumer expert and a reviewer. He wanted feedback on his products, and I was really happy that I was able to provide some of that, and I'm looking forward to speaking with him some more.
You should see if he's interested in doing an interview or a virtual tour of his facility.
Yeah, we'll see. I think there's going to be a lot of that to come, and I think there to some extent at this point we're almost a little spoiled for choice. As I've said before, in recent months, I've realized that my book research has taken on the format of a thesis that will never be finished. And if I keep interviewing the first person who says yes, I am not necessarily going to be filling in the holes in my research that I need to fill. So what I need to do is really buckle down and commit to having some form of viable draft for the book by soon, end of April, I'm sort of telling myself, and figure out what my holes in research are and start prioritizing interviews according to what gives me information I don't already have,
Right.
and tells stories that I can't already adequately tell. Some of these really small brands, unfortunately, don't necessarily move that needle. So I think there will come a time where Lost Woods is a logical choice for a next interview. I think it's not now. I think there needs to be a little bit more age on that product. It needs to be a little bit more mature. And honestly, I think it not being a one man operation would help a lot too. I think it needs to grow a bit.
That's fair.
It's already a sweet story, but it's almost an anecdote, if that makes sense, rather than something which demonstrates industry trends. But it's really cool to see that there are people who are that small in American single malt whiskey that are getting a lot of respect.
All right. So I think that takes us to Tuesday, right?
Yeah. So Tuesday was basically just trade show. Oh no, yeah. Tuesday was actually the awards show. So the awards luncheon, which sorry, the days kind of bleed together a little bit with
Yeah.
it's sort of go from one thing to the next continuously for 6 days in a row, and then try to recall what happened on Tuesday. Yeah, so Tuesday was the awards luncheon, and they announced everybody who won an award at the show, which included some fun things like an Eggo waffle milk or cream based syrup, which I did taste on Tuesday night. So Tuesday night, sort of the big important thing about Tuesday. There were panels, there was an awards show. Basically, I took pictures of every slide that they put up so I could go back through them later. The big takeaway from that is a lot of American single malt whiskeys won awards. Like
Excellent.
an order of magnitude more than had ever won awards at ACSA in the past. I don't have numbers on that personally, so that's an anecdotal piece of evidence, but there were enough American single malt whiskeys that won awards from enough different brands that a lot of people took notice. And it's enough that I couldn't easily write down a list on the spot, and I have to go back through the pictures and make a list.
Sorry.
Like, to say it was 8 different brands, I think is accurate. And many of those brands, possibly more, and many of those brands won awards for multiple bottles. Del Bach won awards for 4 of their entries, won gold
Excellent.
for 4 of their entries.
Excellent.
So that was really cool. Del Bach is honestly fantastic liquid and should get more attention than it does. Although in our circles, I think we see plenty of attention to Del Bach because Ian, our co-host, works there. So we sort of have a bias on that respect. You have a jar of the Eggo waffle sipping cream? No way.
Is that something I'm going to have to go out and find?
That's so cool. Yeah, so I tasted it. Friend bought it for me for a party. It's good to know that that's a product that's actually already on the market, as opposed to just something that showed up at the convention. Because I was wondering about some of these products. I was like, was that a thing that just came out and they're putting it up for show? Or was that from a year ago? Or was that from however many years ago and they just decided to put it up? Or maybe this isn't the first time. Okay, so David and Genji are both talking about. So they've tasted the Eggo waffle sipping cream. Okay, let's talk about this then. So at the tasting, so what happens at the end of the day on Tuesday? So after they've had the award show, because there's a lot of entries that don't win any awards, like a lot. So they can't bring out all of these bottles, and they wouldn't want to because like the awards act as a filter for the stuff that isn't ready or isn't of a high enough quality to bring out for a party and sort of mix in as landmines with the really good stuff. It's nice to go to this tasting party on Tuesday night where it's they call it a grand tasting. Every whiskey that won an award gets set out on a table. Everybody gets a glass. There's dump buckets, there's spit buckets, there's snacks, there's karaoke in this case. And you go find whatever looks interesting to you, knowing that it won an award, so it has passed at least a minimum bar of quality. And then if you don't want to end up on your ass at the end of the night, you use the spit cup. So I personally tasted, I think, about 50 different things. And one of them that definitely stood out was the Eggo waffle sipping cream. Uh, I felt it was extremely well executed. It tastes like an Eggo waffle, no question. It's very sweet for me. I think it would work on the rocks. I think it would work in something like a White Russian, perhaps,
I was
where
about
you
to
just
say.
don't use the coffee liqueur, don't use the sweet coffee liqueur, but use like a Mr. Black or an actual cold brew coffee or something like that as a base. Like do a riff on a White Russian or something with that. As far as a neat sipper, not my thing. But if I wanted an Eggo flavored cream liqueur, I would feel happy reaching for that. It's very well executed. Like no question at all. You know what that is. The one bad thing, and this was my fault. I had a little bit of whiskey left in my glass when I poured the Eggo the sipping cream into my glass, and because of the high proof whiskey that was in there, it curdled the cream. This can happen. I should have known better. I should have washed my glass. Actually, I had to clean my glass afterwards because that clinged to it so much I couldn't smell or taste anything else. And what I should have done with a cream-based liqueur at an event like this was to just get a new cup, like get a plastic cup and taste it out of that instead of using my glass nosing glass, for example. So those were things that were learned, relatively minor things. Um, uh, Here's a cool bit. The end of the grand tasting, when the lights come on, you grab some bottles because the organizers of that event expect those bottles to be gone and they don't care how they get gone. So it is a generally accepted practice that you grab whatever you liked and go home with it. So there's a bit of a mad rush, or there's like a last song and everybody kind of gathers around the thing that they liked. And sort of like hover your hands there because when the lights come up, the tasting is over and it's time to grab your bottles and go. So you'll find this funny. I actually was fighting with Bartolome over the Del Bach Dorado. I had it in front of me, ready to go, and I turned my head to say something to somebody else, and she grabbed it out from under me.
I was going to say I wouldn't want to be in a fight with Bartlemy.
So I got my second choice, which was the Del Bach Classic. I went home with this, and this was how much was left over at the end of the grand tasting. That's how, and this was probably the second or third bottle of this that had been out. This was one of the Gold Award winners. This one is the one that doesn't have the extra wine cask sweetness added to it. Still very good. I took the risk of carrying this home in my luggage with no seal whatsoever and a practically empty bottle. Anything could have happened. I could have had to do lots of dry cleaning. Luckily, nothing bad happened.
Excellent.
And I did myself a favor because I had tasted so much American single malt for the last 2 days before this tasting that I only tasted the American single malts I didn't already know, and there weren't that many of them at that point. And in a couple of cases, like the Dorado, I had a glass of it because I actually wanted to like walk away and listen to music and actually sip on something for a bit, and I knew that would be good. But I discovered a whiskey that I didn't expect to like. It's a Tennessee whiskey. Can you guess what it was?
High H statement Dickel.
Almost.
Oh.
It is a Tennessee whiskey. It might be Dickel. I actually don't know.
Oh, is it Sweetens Cove?
No.
Oh. I can't think of any other sourced Tennessee whiskey.
It has a lore relationship with another Tennessee distillery.
Oh. Is it Nearest Green?
It is Uncle Nearest.
Right.
Master Blend Edition. This is amazing. This is really, really good stuff.
Huh.
This one gold. Actually, that appears to be bronze, and I disagree if it is.
Yeah.
I thought this, in that light, it sort of looks, I don't know. I'll have to go check. This is really good. This was my favorite non-American single malt that was there in the whiskey category. Another thing that an honorable mention, I really liked the Cairo barrel aged gin. Which is something I'll probably never see again because it's that small scale of a thing, but it was extremely competent It was really tasty. The botanicals in the barrel were well in balance. It was a good quality spirit. Really good stuff. So anyway, I'm going to pour a little bit of this Uncle Nearest Master Blend right now. And also, amazingly, there's still half this barrel left. I feel like people were sleeping on this.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of brands that I've been meaning to try something from, and Uncle Nearest is near the top of the list because of uh, a friend of mine who primarily drinks scotch was gifted a bottle of it, and I think one of the either the flagship or one of the near flagship releases they were gifted a bottle of, and they insisted that I should go buy a bottle for myself. So I guess I'm going to have to actually do that now.
All right, real quick, because we're over 2 hours now. The third day of the convention was all panels. I actually got a long leisurely brunch, I guess, with Joseph O'Sullivan and one of his new associates, and we had a good long industry, like they were sort of griping to each other about industry stuff. You know what? Everybody who's had a job sometimes just gets together with your coworkers to complain a little bit, right? So I got to sort of be a witness to that and ask some questions about how things work on the inside of the brand, and nothing I can share, of course. But that's one of the privileges of being at an event like this. And then I went to some panels in the afternoon, which included a lovely panel moderated by Caitlin Bartolome about what the service industry, like bars and so on, bars and restaurants, want spirits producers to know about, like how to sell them spirits without being pushy, about how to make something that's about how to find a product that matches the vibe of the business, such things like that. Really good topic. I learned a lot as a consumer and as a writer on the business about how brands and businesses think about spirits. And the sad reality is that neat sippers are nobody's biggest seller when it comes to the service industry. It's all cocktails.
Yeah.
And so if you have a whiskey that all you can say is this is a really good base for a cocktail, that's actually amazing. If you have a really good cocktail spec that your high quality ultra premium whiskey really works for, like for example my Stranahan smoked old fashioned that I fell in love with, if you can nail that formula, you have a winner of a product. If you deliver a product to a bar that has no purpose, you're not going to move that product, right? Thing for thing's sake is not a useful product to have. But one of the things that I kind of didn't realize is that sometimes you can sort of develop a cocktail that is a sort of a riff on something else with a split base, using something premium that people want and something that people overlook. They say like an ounce of the one and a half ounce of the other, and you start to move some product that way that otherwise wouldn't move. And brands thinking about that possibility and not being offended by it is actually potentially a really good move. So besides that, the rest of it was sort of a technical nature. I mentioned Mark Thaler's talk on sensory analysis, which was great. I'm going to rewatch that recording and maybe share some out about it. But I think in some sense, there's a lot of public information along those lines already. So maybe not. Maybe I will. There's only so many things I can write about and talk about. And that was pretty much it, because what happened after that was a nice after party. Which I made some industry connections there, had some interesting conversations with people, but mostly it was just a really loud, crowded bar. And I sort of found somebody I already knew in the industry. This was, I put up a selfie a while ago. It's Anna, whose last name is slipping my mind right now. The sort of distiller slash data analyst at Westward. Who had just told me that she had clearance to come on our podcast with John Harris to have a sort of doubleheader interview where they can pretty much say anything they want. They have clearance from the PR department to do that. The only restriction is it's not going to be next week, because after this conference, everybody needs to catch up on work. And
Right.
that makes sense. So probably in 2 or 3 weeks, we'll have them on. That's really cool. And she and I spent an hour talking about synesthesia because she's a synesthetic. She has sound taste synesthesia.
Hmm.
So like sounds affect how she tastes things, and that's a fascinating thing to have for somebody who's heavily involved in the blending and tasting of a whiskey product. That in itself would be a super cool interview because I think a lot of people that's like an underappreciated um, syndrome, I guess you would
I
say.
mean, it also adds color to the blending process, and
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting to at some point have a round table of blenders who do, you know, different style, maybe not different styles, but who have different methods of blending would be kind of a cool thing to do.
Yeah. And that was also one of the takeaways from the sensory panel is you can't trust one person. You need more data. You need a panel.
I would like
So
to volunteer for any such panels.
yep. Another cool thing I might get to do, I may have convinced them to. Westward does a light filtration process, one of those slightly cool it down and
Mhm.
then filter it for some of their products. And I asked, have you done like data driven analysis of whether that makes a difference? Because there's so little good first party information available to consumers who would like to know. And it's not full on chill filtration. They're not going to 0 degrees Celsius and passing it through like a super fine
Yeah,
microfilter, right? It's just to take the haze out of their 45% and below products.
yeah.
But even then, even after that filtration, they still get the Scotch haze in the bottom of the bottle if you let it sit.
Mhm.
So like this isn't the full chill filtration process. That's not the point. They are willing to show me, walk me through the triangle test and so on of a before and after filtration product.
Okay.
So in a few months, I'm gonna arrange a visit at Westward where they have that set up for me and spend a weekend doing the sensory analysis with people there. In theory, sorry, this is a tentative plan. I
Mhm.
asked, could you do that? And the answer was where she's willing to check into it at the very
Excellent.
least.
I mean, that
So I
is
think
the
that would be
most
really
one can
cool.
ask for.
That would be really cool information for me to be able to provide to consumers.
Mhm.
So I'm really excited to be able to try that. And then and we had been talking at like the basically next to the kitchen because it was the only place that wasn't super crowded and wasn't super noisy in that bar. But eventually we decided to just go find a quieter bar to sort of actually have our sort of close out the conference drinks. And I ended up joining the rest of the Westward crew at a bar, sort of a tiki-ish bar, and closed out the night. Here's the story you've all been waiting for, the 7 of you who are still watching. So one of the people I ran into at that bar was, of course, Miles Monroe, who had already had a brief conversation with me, recognized me from hearing me on another podcast, which he was listening to as background noise while he was blending, and I can't think of a greater compliment. He was ordering drinks, and I saw that they had offered him a shot of Malort for picking up the tab for everyone who was there. Because he was picking up the tab on the company card for everyone. They offered him a shot of Malort because they had it behind the bar. And I said, I've never had Malort. Could I join you? And so, and then an hour. So we sat down and talked for whatever. And then an hour later, he agreed early on. He agreed early on, but he was like, okay, let's wait until later because like everybody else has drinks and everything. So we'll sit down and talk. We talked about barrel management. We talked about blending. We talked about all sorts of cool industry stuff. And then at the end of the night, we walked up the bar. We ordered a pair of Malort shots, and I have on video me taking my first ever shot of Jepson's Malort with Miles Monroe. Mic drop.
That's very cool. You also got to
And
meet one
now
of
for the
my.
audience who doesn't know, Jepson's Malort is basically a meme of as a particularly bitter and horrible tasting wormwood liqueur that you pretty much can't drink without cringing. And
Honestly, just
it
tastes like pencil savings to me.
it was a little bit sweet, it was very woody, and it had a kick of bitterness at the end. And I've honestly had things that were worse. I've had things that were more bitter. but try as I might, I still cringed.
Oh,
So there it is.
I think I did too. But everyone talks about like coming up with like creative descriptions for it, and it really just tastes like liquid pencil shavings to me.
There's any number of ways to describe it, and none of them are flattering.
Yeah.
Didn't they have some strange internet dispute over cocktail recipes recently? I don't know, but there's a lovely video ad where the person who was supposed to be advertising it as a delicious product, I think it was just a bit, kept taking a shot and cringing and ruining the take. So they have just a series of outtakes, and the guy is getting increasingly plastered. And that is this is one of those brands that leans into, like, this is the hazing shot that when you go to Chicago, and this wasn't Chicago, this was Denver. I have no idea why they were carrying Malort, let alone offering it to people who picked up the tab. But this is like a hazing ritual. When you are in Chicago, someone from Chicago will offer you a Malort shot as a thing that you do. And I think they just kind of lean into the fact that it is a hazing ritual.
Although they
Greg
could
from How to
recently
Drink.
release a bourbon that I've heard very good things about.
Yes. So the bourbon is either MGP or Dickel. I've heard both at this point.
Neither of which are to say that it's bad, by the way. MGP and Dickel both put out wonderful whiskey. I will say that my source for it being pretty good is Afro Beer Chick on Twitter. I can't think of what her spirits podcast is off the top of my head, but she said that it was pretty good. So
okay, well, I didn't try that one, but I did get to try Malort. And Greg from How to Drink has a video segment where he tries to make a good cocktail out of it, and his takeaway was pretty much, if you treat it like bitters, it works. It is essentially wormwood bitters. It just comes in a giant bottle for reasons. And if you treat it like bitters, or you treat it like a spritz or a wash or something like that, then it actually kind of works in cocktails. The other half of Andrew's comment was, apparently there was an argument over who invented candy cane Malort. I literally have not heard of this, but I'm curious to go look it up now. Not
I'm
live.
afraid to.
This feels like a bit of industry trivia to know, if for no other reason than to know it.
So,
but anyway, I think at this point I've covered pretty much everything that is in my head. Yeah. I'm going to have to go revise all the sort of conversations and contacts and stuff that I've had.
You did get to meet one of my distilling heroes.
Who's that?
Becky Harris.
Oh, yes. How could I forget to have mentioned that? I actually sat in on a meetup talk. This was not a panel or anything. This is sort of a vaguely organized event. Mark Vierthaler and Becky Harris were running the Q&A for the producer meetup. And I had sort of exhausted my interest in the exhibits, and I sort of walked over there and just hung out until I had a chance to meet Becky Harris, because she doesn't make an American single malt. She's Catoctin Creek, which makes rye. And
some other interesting things.
Yeah. But notably not American single malt whiskey. And that's so when I introduced myself as the American single malt whiskey writer, she was confused that I wanted to talk to her. And I said, well, I have an interest in all things sort of good whiskey and craft spirits. And, we're fans. And I felt I needed to introduce myself. So I did get to have that short conversation with her. Boy. I mean, yeah, I was giving you some of the highlights of my trip as I went. Am I missing anything else?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I'm pretty tired. It's been a long day.
Yeah, I think it's time to call it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there was one really important thing that I should mention. I put this on my Instagram story. I should probably do some kind of a write-up about it. They shared various statistics about the industry during the keynote, which was on the last day of the conference. And one of the statistics that came up was the amount of diversity in the industry. The statistics, I'm not going to quote all the statistics, but they were quoted in terms of percentage of distilleries who employ X. So it was a breakdown by race, and it was a breakdown by gender and gender identity. And the number of trans and non-binary people, the number of distilleries employing trans and non-binary people is astounding. An unprecedented number in my day job, the tech industry. I almost couldn't believe the numbers, right? It was like more than two-thirds or more than a third of all distilleries employing each of those categories. I think that's amazing. I love seeing how diverse the craft spirits industry is. I think it speaks to the type of people that are attracted to the products and are attracted to making the products. It's such a welcoming industry by everyone for everyone, and that's really inspiring. And besides that, there were figures about growth and so on, and like that's it should be the most exciting thing. Look at all this growth, but I'm so blown away by just the diversity figures and a couple of other small things. It's really hard to get past. But anyway, I think the appropriate cheers to have at the end of this podcast is to the continued growth and improvements in quality, which is a horrible phrasing for the sentiment, but I'm tired. So to the continued growth of craft spirits and American single malt, to great successes ahead.
We'll see you in the lodge.
Until next time, we'll see you in the lodge. Cheers.